Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Yeah.
Coming at you at noon on Sunday, an
Oh my God.
unusually early recording time for us.
I
So
know.
let us know if we sound smarter or less smart.
Right, we're
At this
both
hour.
having coffee
We're both
still.
drinking coffee.
So
Right. Some
it
of us
might it
have
might
not.
be the type of podcast that is the second half is better.
Right. Right. We might be wandering around confused a lot for the first half because my coffee has not kicked in yet at all. But maybe
Oh
it's
boy.
better to be slightly out of it as we report on the latest at the RNC.
I mean, sure.
They seem slightly out of it. It seems they announced yesterday that okay, I'm going to start at the beginning, but then I'm also going to tell you my impression of what happened here.
Okay.
They announced that they're not going to let reporters on site when delegates vote to nominate Donald Trump. And this is really the only reason to have a convention.
It is. I mean, there's other things that happen at conventions that we know
all of
that
those could happen online. The only reason to put delegates in a room together to shout yay and nay,
Yes.
whatever they're up to, is to have it be on camera. There is no other purpose to doing it.
It's to get a convention bump.
It's literally
that's what happens.
ratings.
Like you always get one. Like whoever's convention goes first gets like a 5-point bump after it. It doesn't matter whether it's a good convention. Nope. Just being on television for like 3 nights is enough to make people be like, I want to vote for that guy, even if you're somebody as bad as Donald Trump.
It's simple math.
Yeah. And a man who loves nothing more than being on television at any moment that he can be on television.
And he certainly isn't the science of ratings better than any other person.
And he certainly isn't afraid of being in front of crowds. He's had multiple rallies. He was just in Florida this week, like screaming at an unmasked crowd from not long away, like surrounded by a bunch of other unmasked people near him while he was shouting without a mask. So it's like, the whole thing is weird to me. None of it tracks.
Well, they're going to live stream it in this it's like a very state media kind of move where like they will show you what they want to show you. I have some theories about why this might be. They've already canceled the part in Jacksonville where they were going to go and get coronavirus in Jacksonville because in Jacksonville they were like, please don't bring your coronavirus here.
Don't come here. Yeah.
They claim that they can't let press in to the North Carolina portion of the event because they are because limited attendance is being enforced by state officials because of coronavirus. Sure. That's a convenient excuse because they already have diminished the number of delegates anyway. There's only going to be 336 delegates there. So it's like, once you're taking away arbitrary numbers of delegates, take away as many as you need to make sure press are there because they're the only people that actually matter at your convention.
Right. Well, is the fear that if they only have 336 delegates there, then there won't be one more single other person there? There won't be 337 because no one will want to go? Is that the issue?
I think that they are
after the Tulsa debacle
worried about it looking spare, which is correct. It will. And then I also have a secret thought, which is I wonder if there's going to be some sort of revolt inside the chambers that they don't want you to see or that they want to be able to turn the camera away from, because Trump is polling really badly right now. Yeah. I think there are a lot of sort of normal official GOP types who are a little bit concerned about what's going on. We're going to talk in a second about Mitch McConnell's advice to senators in tough races.
And a lot of these people are not even going to that convention.
Exactly.
Some of these senators have already announced that they're going. They have a nice excuse with COVID, but I mean, I think it's because they may not have been wanting to go anyway.
Been wanting to go in the first place. I just wonder if, not that I think this is a thing that we know is going to happen, but if there is some concern that there will be some sort of rebellion inside the chambers, I think that's something we can always expect to happen at the Democratic convention. So it won't be shocking when it does, and it will. So sorry, guys. But I don't think that's something that really tracks with the Republican brand at the moment. And I wonder if they're using this to sort of conveniently diminish any opportunity for anyone to find out about it.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, thinking back about the 2016 Democratic convention, I bet in hindsight, Hillary Clinton would have preferred that there not be press there.
Exactly. If she had been an authoritarian leader, maybe she would have enforced that policy.
Right, exactly. So I can see how they got here.
Yeah. So I think that might be what's going on. Also, Trump is maybe not even going to be there himself, but he's also, been spending the week trying to discredit the election anyway. So they have plans. It feels like the GOP is certainly like at a little bit of an impasse about whether they want there to be an election or not.
Yeah.
On Thursday, Trump tweeted, with universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. Here's a few things before we even get into how ridiculous this is. In many states, the mail-in voting is absentee voting.
That's right.
In so many states, including a lot of states that he seems to think are going to have fraudulent elections, what you are doing in requesting a mail-in ballot is requesting an absentee ballot for yourself. They are the same thing.
They are the same thing.
So absentee voting can't be good if mail-in voting is bad. That's a side note. That's a logical hole he's fallen into. I get it. That's not really the point here. Trump also, he was asked about it later in the day and basically like doubled down on the idea that he's just trying to sow discord and confusion about the election, about the credibility of the election. At the press conference later that day, he said, what people are now looking at is all these stories write about the fact that these elections will be fraudulent. They'll be fixed, rigged. Everyone's looking at it. A lot of people are saying this will probably happen.
No one is saying that.
No one's at all has been
Not
saying
even
that.
any members of his own party are saying that.
No,
actually.
I mean,
he's on an island here.
He's saying it.
Yeah. And he's also coming up with like all sorts of like insane reasons like that just don't have any proof. I mean, there never has been any proof that this is fraudulent, but like now he's like making up like wild stories about like how the foreign governments are going to be printing these ballots. And there's all, I mean, like he's got a lot of, I mean, his imagination is working overtime, certainly right now.
He's an imaginative kind of guy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
it's all imagination.
It's all imagination. And also, as anyone with a handy copy of the Constitution or just a basic civics education could tell you, he doesn't have the power to delay the election.
No, he doesn't.
And it doesn't sound like his rank and file are coming along with him on this.
Even Mitch McConnell, who will carry his water for just about anything, was like, we're going to be having the election on November 3rd. So that's going to be Kevin McCarthy, who's a big supporter of his. I mean, basically most of the power players in the Republican Party were like, we're having the election on November 3rd. Right. Also, I saw a stat recently that seemed a little low to me. It was something like either like 36 or 38% of people were wanting to cast mail ballots in November. I thought that was low. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are excited to vote, I think. And like while mail-in voting is voting, I think that there are a lot of people who also, because of this, I think are probably thinking that the safest way, and I have thought this for a while after I realized that it was taking months and months and months for my ballot to be counted in California. Granted, it was ultimately counted, but I think there are a lot of people who, while they don't necessarily think that there's fraud in mail-in voting, there I think is still sort of this like fairly prevalent knowledge that like it might just be better if I go to my polling place anyway. And there's, even in the middle of the pandemic, I think that people are just going to probably be doing a lot of voting. Polling places are open. I mean, like even in states that are, sending ballots to everyone, like California, I'm assuming that we are going to have polling places that we're going to be able to go to. There's probably going to be early voting, and in some of these places that have had like primary issues, like Georgia, they've really like opened up a bunch of new polling places. The stadium for the Atlanta Hawks is going to be open for people to vote at. Like my guess is that like this ultimately turns into something that becomes less of an issue as we get closer to the election anyway, because I think people are just going to go vote.
Yeah, I also think that Trump constantly telling people that mail-in ballots are fraudulent it's not going to convince anyone that mail-in voting is fraudulent.
No, nobody's buying that.
No one's buying that, but it is going to make them concerned that he'll use that as a premise to throw out their vote. So I think
100%.
They're just going to be like, if you are the kind of person who has lived in a district where you've waited 6 hours to vote, you are a person who might risk your life to go vote.
Well, right. And like,
it's not great though, because
it's not great though. And you should, too. Right. Exactly. You want other people to vote too. And you shouldn't not cast a mail-in ballot because of this. Like if you only feel comfortable with a mail-in ballot and you don't want to go to your polling place, then for God's sake, like send in a mail-in ballot.
Yeah.
But at least in my mind, and I have a feeling there are a lot of people who are thinking this way. This is also probably how people are getting coronavirus. But I mean, if I can, in my brain anyway, if I can go to the grocery store, then I can also probably go vote.
I think the difference is you never are going to be asked to spend 6 hours at a grocery store, whereas you just don't know with a polling place.
Well, that's the problem. I know that I won't here, which is one of the nice things about voting at my polling place here. But you're right, in some places.
Here, it's understood that even though the election results take a long time, that mail-in ballots generally work, that we trust the process.
We don't live in a state who is actively trying to keep us from voting.
Right. And also they have already started sending out election mailers to check our addresses, to check and make sure that we, are registered at, where we want to be registered. I've already received, to make sure that we're getting the ballot in the right way. I got 2 of those too. And then I also got one to make sure my ballot was in the right language.
Oh, yes, I did that.
18 languages you can get your ballot in. Interestingly, not French. It was just, and the way that it was framed, it was like, it said like, if you want your ballot in any language other than English, choose one of these. But I misread it. And I was like, am I allowed to choose English on this list? I don't see English on this list.
Right.
Everything's fine, you guys. But I feel like here we already understand mail-in voting as a process. Like I don't normally vote mail-in. I like to go to the polling place, but I will be voting with a mail-in ballot this year.
Yeah.
It's places like, like New York.
Yes.
Where they mismanage the process and they already have restrictive voting policies.
They don't have an infrastructure to
count these. Or places like Rhode Island where they require you to get your ballot notarized because they require 2 witnesses and a notary.
Okay.
It's like, well, at that point, you might as well go to a polling place because you're going to get coronavirus from having to convene 17 people to vote. And then there's also states where, there's very little trust in the Board of Elections and the Secretary of State's like infrastructure. And I think the problem is like, the reason he wants you to think mail-in ballots are fraudulent is literally just because they can send them to everyone. It's just because it's accessible.
Right.
And so to fall into the hole of worrying about a process that is by its very nature more accessible, is like their argument is literally just that they are sending ballots to every registered voter and that for some reason violates some principle that they
because they would creates real because they know a good chunk of the people who are going to get ballots are people who would not have probably voted otherwise. Yeah. That's the concern. Too many people voting is the concern.
What makes an election rigged is that more people
voted
who are qualified to vote in it is like so insane. And that's literally the argument they're using.
Yeah.
So if you just vote by mail, if you can, and if you can't, figure out another way to vote. But also I feel like there are a lot of states where this is going to change really rapidly because we're seeing huge COVID outbreaks occurring in states that had sort of declared COVID over.
Right.
And so the states where it's actually too dangerous to vote in person on election day are going to be different than the states that perceive it to be the case right now. And so get yourself a mail-in ballot now because you don't know how dangerous your polling place is going to be on election day.
Right. 100%.
That's all we can say.
Yep.
And also don't listen to Donald Trump. Mail-in voting is fine. Also, there's no election fraud here. So like the election fraud is on the advertising side and it is being perpetrated in Trump's favor. So like don't worry about it.
It's on the imagination side.
It's on the imagination side and the Russia doing campaign ads for Trump side. It has nothing to do with your ballot, so don't worry.
Right. Yeah.
But speaking of television ads, Trump's campaign team pulled their TV ad buys for the next 6 days to examine what's going on because they're panicking because Joe Biden is leading by double digits even in states that Trump won.
Right.
And they're not really sure what's going on. I mean, I could tell them what's going on.
Well, I could tell them too.
Everyone knows what's going on. But
it's interesting.
Reconvene a little.
Yeah. I saw an interesting story on Meet the Press this morning, actually, when they were talking about like kind of what the plan is. They were talking about it more specifically and like what's going on in the suburbs right now. And we have talked on the podcast about how those numbers have like really flipped in favor of Biden right now. But none of the things that they felt like were going to stick have stuck. I mean, that's why you're seeing all of this law and order business right now, because they're trying to scare up, white suburban women that there might be like black mobs coming to their neighborhood. And it hasn't been working. That hasn't worked. You've seen them sort of like try and, call Biden a Trojan horse for the socialist commies.
If only.
That I was going to say, if only that hasn't worked. And I think one of the draws that I certainly didn't see of having Biden as your candidate is that it is hard to get anything to stick to him because he's the world's biggest nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, being
he has no
bland,
vision, you can't blame him for vision.
Right, being bland and milquetoast has never been such an asset as it is right now.
Right. I mean, I feel like it works against Trump, but not really in Biden's favor, because
Correct.
It also means, like, what is anyone voting for? No one's going to be like pumped to go to the polls for Biden.
Right. Yeah.
So it drives down turnout, but
yeah, it's just negative partisanship, basically, is all it is at this point.
It doesn't make it easy.
But Biden doesn't drive that same negative partisanship.
Totally. Well, my mom actually said this a few months ago, where I was freaking out as usual, because I was like, I can't believe we keep putting up the same guy to run, and then he always loses, or she always loses, and then we wonder what happened, even though we have had an identical candidate in John Kerry lose, we've had an identical candidate in Al Gore lose, we've had an identical candidate in Hillary Clinton lose. And my mom was like, here's what I will say about Joe Biden. People don't dislike him the way they disliked Hillary. Correct. Now that was unfair, because that was misogynistic. And obviously, totally. I mean, we dislike Hillary for political reasons, but that is the same reasons we dislike Biden. The difference, though, is that with Hillary, it was really easy to get these negative portrayals to stick. And with Biden, people just don't have the same ill will towards him that they did towards her. He has not been the picture of partisan messaging since, 30 years ago. Right. He's just been some guy who everyone kind of likes, who looks cool in aviators, who says things that don't make a lot of sense. And so sometimes you have to tune him out. And who posed next to Barack Obama a lot. Like, there's not the same sort of animosity towards him. So I think that does work in his favor. It does. I think it absolutely does. It works against Trump's favor. Yes. I don't know if it works in Biden's favor. Nothing is working in Biden's favor, because he's a terrible candidate. But I think it works against Trump's favor. Right. And if that's the only favor that I was going to say, and if that is the only thing that anyone has, then that's probably enough. You know what I mean? Like, so, whatever. But Trump's in a tough situation right now. His approval ratings are plummeting. The economy is also plummeting. And Mitch McConnell is now telling senators that they should feel free to distance themselves from him if they need to, because I think Mitch McConnell sees that they might lose the Senate clearly by saying this, he's sort of indicated that, but in a way that it is rare to get him to admit. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't see Mitch McConnell telling some of these senators who are in tough races that they can run away from the president if he was not seeing that as A, the only thing that might help them, and B, the only thing that is going to allow him to keep his own job. Yeah. Because they have 3 seats that are potentially in real bad shape, but the seats that they don't consider the highest risk seats are still pretty risky. Well, and they've already started spending money in some of these places too. Yeah. The fact that the National Senatorial Committee has spent millions of dollars in Iowa right now is a bad look. It's a real bad look. And the Des Moines Register polls have Teresa Greenfield ahead of Joni Ernst. They're close polls, but I would be shocked if, now that Maine has a real race on their hands, even though Sarah Gideon's fine, she's not the most exciting candidate, but I would be shocked if Susan Collins does not find herself in a really desperate race, because there's been so much attention focused on her as the last sort of moderate Republican. Right. That's why Cory Gardner is in such a shitty situation. He's fairly moderate. It's not that he's some sort of wackadoo, but it's just why have a moderate who's going to go along with this extremism if you could not? Tom Tillis is not looking good. Martha McSally in Arizona is not looking good. Right. Those are the 3 that you just most recently named that they think are probably cooked at this point. But we still that doesn't even include Maine and Iowa and Montana. Right. We have Steve Bullock in that race. Especially if what's-his-face wins that Republican primary there in Kansas. Yeah, right. And you've also got, apparently there's some concern about a first-term senator up in Alaska now. My mom has been following this race really carefully, because she is obsessed with Al Gross, who is the independent candidate in that race. Oh. Al Gross is who she has been donating her Senate money to. Love it. Because he's kind of quirky. He's he's a fisherman or something. He's something random like that. Yeah. But my mom's been tracking him for months. She found him around the time that she found Charles Booker. And she's been just slowly trying to get him into the national discussion. And it's actually been working. He's been rising in polls, and that race has in general been tightening up. And so he's kind of like this dark horse now in this Alaska race that we're all really excited about.
Yeah.
But even Lindsey Graham's race is tight.
Graham. Well, and even McConnell himself has like, I mean, I don't think that there's a ton of people who really think that he's going to lose that race, but he's going to have to spend money. He's going to have to spend time. He's probably going to have to debate her. You know, I mean, not that
buys anyone anything. She's big nothing, but
yeah. But I think, you know, Democrats only need to get one of those. If they win those three, the North Carolina, Arizona, and what's the other one? Colorado. If they win those three, they assume that they're probably going to lose in Alabama. Right. They only need to, if they win the presidency and have the tiebreaker, they only need to win one more of any of those places. The Maine one, the Iowa one, Montana one, either of the two Georgia ones, the Kansas one, the South Carolina one, the Kentucky one, the Alaska one. So you see why he is starting to probably get concerned, because like we only need to just by happenstance like accidentally win one of those other like 7 races and we've got control.
Well, and one disadvantage that they're going to have is that because there were contested primaries in some of these, they have, I mean, this is the one thing I will say about the race for McConnell's seat is that Amy McGrath is going to have Charles Booker as a surrogate, I'm sure.
Totally. And she's got a shit ton of money too. She's
got a ton of money. She's going to have, they have created a political star in that race that is going to then be an asset to her and not McConnell. I mean, when you look at something, that's the same, the Maine race, that was a contested primary. I know Sarah Gideon had a lot more money, but there are going to be people who found constituencies in parts of the state that were not necessarily showing up who are going to be surrogates for them. I mean, that's why you want contested primaries in these situations, is you want to find it in the same way that as soon as you have a contested primary for the Democratic presidency, you have Bernie Sanders able to say to the far left, hey, you should probably vote for this guy. Even and he's not what we wanted, but he's better than Trump. Whereas other than like Joe Biden doesn't have a line to any of us. With him saying that we should vote for him means nothing to us. But you know, it means something when Sanders at least tries to say that. So like in some of these races, we're going to have a local version of that where you're going to have some assets in the election process that have not always been present in these seats because they have not been heavily contested in public and meaniful ways. So,
I also just in thinking about this story too, I realize that I'm far from the first person who has had this idea, but
take credit for it.
But it was interesting in thinking sort of like the larger context of where the GOP is at right now in, you know, coming up in this presidential election, that it looks for all the world that they're going to lose and potentially lose the Senate, like what this means for them in the future. And when you look at sort of like what these senators are having to do, where they're trying to thread a needle between keeping the Trump base voting for you, but still sort of like denouncing him in some way, just because Trump in the future isn't on the ballot, this is going to something that they're going to have to be reckoning with in the future. And this is something that is going to cause them to have like insane primaries where there's always going to be a quote unquote Trump Republican who is maybe going to win because they have support of the base. Like I'm thinking back to sort of like some of the Tea Party crazies who like lost them elections in the past. Like we're going to be seeing this for a while because they don't know who they are right now. They don't know if they're Trump Republicans. They have to be to a certain degree because, you know, half of the party is one. And so, you know, they've really, by wrapping themselves in him, which I think for a while they thought was a great idea because he was charismatic and people liked him and he really drove the base. They have really, I think, you know, and it won them temporary control, but like this is going to have far-reaching effects for them moving forward. This does not end after he loses in 2020, which hopefully happens.
No, they're going to pretend it ends. No one's ever going to have heard of him when this is over. They're gonna,
except every GOP voter.
Right, exactly. Like that's all of these people are going, who have been serving with under Mitch McConnell in the Senate right now, are going to pretend they're going to really harken back to the one time they took a vote in opposition to a Trump policy, and it's all they're going to talk about, and they're going to act like they were the one person who stood up to Trump, and you're going to hear that over and over and over again. So just get into your mind right now that it's not true.
Right.
Because all of these people are going to pretend like they have never met the man. Right. Which is, I think, what a lot of your conservative family members, I was
going to say, that's what I would do. That's what I would do if I were them too. I mean, I can't blame them.
The other thing I feel like we should do to be gracious during this election season in an effort to win is you are just going to have to be gracious about letting some of your most horrible relatives pretend like they've never heard of Donald Trump.
Right.
Like, that's just going to be a thing that we're all going to have to agree to do so that we can welcome them back into the fold in a way that feels, you know, that doesn't feel accusatory. Like, it's going to feel terrible because you're going to want to be like, I told you so 100 times. And also you're
you're going to want to send them a picture of them in their MAGA hat.
Right. Like, you're going to want to just hit them with every horrible thing they've ever said. And that, you know, at some point the education process will have to begin. But at this moment, you're probably just going to have to let your horrible uncle pretend that he's never heard of Donald Trump.
Right.
And just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yes.
That's life.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I've been dreading this week all week. Now I'm dreading all the month because there is nothing I want less than to know who Biden's running mate's going to be.
I am starting to want to know immediately because I want to know that he isn't, well, I've been panicked enough about this that, and you know this, listeners, because you've been listening to the podcast, right. But like, I'm finally to the point where I'm like, just pick Kamala Harris and like, let's move on with our lives, which is not even what I want him to do. Like, I don't actually want him to do that, but like, you know, it looks like we're going to get a pick August 10th, which is like weeks after he said. So he's obviously pushing it down the road.
No, and I think it's supposed to give it to us yesterday.
Right. He doesn't know the answer, I think. But you know, I'm kind of like getting to the point where it's like, okay, we're down to like, most people think we're down to potentially 3 people. Yeah. If the reporting is correct, and it's Karen Bass and it's Kamala Harris and it's Susan Rice. And I'm just so scared that he's going to pick Susan Rice. I just want him to do what everybody else on earth thinks that he should do, which seems to be the prevailing thought, seems to be like, let's just do Kamala. So
I think the opposite. I want him to never announce his running mate. I feel like this can only hurt. Like, I think back to 2016 all the time, and to the day and time that I found out that Hillary Clinton had chosen Tim Kaine as her running mate. I remember where I was standing and what I was doing. I was in my parents' kitchen, and that was the moment that I was like, this fucker wants to lose this fucking election. And it was also the moment where I realized I couldn't make excuses for her anymore. Oh, yeah. Like, I was somebody who I've both flirted with being to Clinton and also being angry with Clinton, and politically we don't align very much, but like, you know, whatever. But I was willing to maybe like be a hesitant mouthpiece for her campaign in some way. Right. And when she chose Tim Kaine, I felt like they had tried, like they shot me in the face. Like it was like literally the moment where I was like, oh, you really don't care about my vote. Right. Like, you have just sent a message to me and the almost 50% of Democratic voters that voted for Bernie Sanders that you literally don't care for our vote. You don't want our vote. You don't care about it. You're not going to work for it. You know, and as much as I, you know, like, understand that like the campaign strategy was fucked there anyway. Like, she was never looking for our vote. Like, I understand that this was not the moment that she made that decision. It was the most public pronouncement of that, where she was just like, crystallized. I will not bargain with the left. Yeah. I will not be a candidate who bargains with the left. You guys can fuck off. And I just have this fear that I will have that moment with Joe. I would like Joe Biden to avoid giving me that moment. I would like, and I'm having never feel that.
I'm having the exact same thoughts as you, but my solution is to just know that he hasn't done that.
I don't trust him to not, but how can you trust him to not do that?
No, I don't trust him to not do that, but he's going to have to name it at some point. That's why I'm like, do I have to wait 2 more weeks? Like, let's just fucking be done with it.
Would rather not feel the crushing despair that I felt the moment I heard the Tim Kaine announcement. Fair. At least for the summer. I want to have
he's gonna have to pick. The problem is that he's coming up on the convention.
No, so I know.
I think that partly
I say leave it till after. Don't even worry about it.
Partly the reason that I think he's pushing it is because he doesn't have the right answer yet. If I were Kamala Harris, I think I would be shaking in my boots right now, because I think that in part what this delay has most recently been is that I think that my guess anyway is that she was probably the prevailing leader there.
Clearly.
All signs pointed that was the case. Then we got some reporting last week as to why maybe that wasn't a great idea. We talked about that with the whole Chris Dodd issue.
Right. Just that,
sexual predator Chris Dodd, who's helping find
right.
a woman presidential or vice presidential
exactly
candidate right now. And some of her allies requested a phone call like with the vetting committee this week, which was granted, basically just to sort of like correct the record on that. So I think that she certainly wants it. We know that, but like I think there's more sort of public jockeying than I feel like I have seen recently. You're seeing Karen Bass and Susan Rice on television. At any point, a camera can get turned on them.
Mm-hmm. It's wild,
which is weird for Karen Bass because like she is a person who has like consistently flown under the radar. When her name first got floated, the prevailing thing that you saw online was, who dat?
Karen Bass, right.
Which I would, question people to look inward if you don't know who the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus is. But regardless, it's going to be interesting because I think that he knows that he doesn't have to pick. A lot of the reasons, the one reason that you might pick early or earlier than you said, is that you sort of like need to inject some sort of, something into your campaign, which I think the thought process on his part, which as much as I hate to agree, is that he doesn't really need to do that.
I would contend that any attempt to inject anything into his campaign is more likely to backfire than to inject
I agree.
a good thing into his campaign. He should just take a nap and let Trump self-destruct and not stay in his basement bunker, and he shouldn't make any announcements. He should have his surrogates go out and say nice things about him to whatever group of people he's not talking to. And he should just sleep until November, because any major announcement that this campaign, that is exactly what I felt with Hillary Clinton, is I was like, what a waste of an opportunity. Yeah. She took a moment where we were all going to be like, let's laser focus on what the Clinton campaign is doing, and made it insulting to half of her base. That is not something that Joe Biden needs right now, because half of his base doesn't care for him anyway.
Yeah.
No one cares for him. He doesn't even have a base of people that really care for him. No. What he has is a group of people that are rightfully interested in Donald Trump not being the president, and a small group of people who are, because of their own fortunes, interested in the status quo kind of continuing.
Right, I was going to say,
and protecting their little kingdom.
A lot of corporatists who want him to be the president.
Well, and I have to tell you, I have a new theory. I'm going to inject it here because I don't see why not. For one of my book clubs, I'm reading A Gentleman in Moscow. Highly recommend. It's been a delight. It's great for quarantine because it's about a man who's stuck in a hotel. But it's like a delightful book. But he's talking about the Russian system in it, because it's basically like he's an aristocrat who gets put under hotel house arrest when the Bolsheviks take over, and is sort of like watching the passage of time as like Stalin comes to power and like the Russian government kind of.
Sure.
And he kind of observes that in their attempt to, upend the system and bring the workers into the power and whatever, all they've done is just recreated a new kind of autocratic government. And I realized that in the one thing, I think, we see Donald Trump doing these things that an autocrat would do, and he clearly like admires that style of governance. And I was kind of like, oh my God, are we going to have this Russian style of government? But I think culturally we are actually just like a corporate democracy. I think that our status quo, and the thing that we always return back to, is corporate democracy, meaning corporations democratically control the government and the rest of us have nothing. But, but we're a corporatist government. And in some ways I would be eager to return to some semblance of that, just because I understand the rules of the game a little better. Like, I think this is so destabilizing. This moment in American history is so destabilizing for all of us, because it seems like the rules aren't there anymore. And it used to be that you could trust that the fortunes of Wall Street controlled policy that was, that was and wasn't possible in Washington. And you could sort of trust that, Jamie Dimon was really the one pulling the strings, or, you could trust in certain things. And right now it seems like there's sort of like a weird dissension in the ranks in corporate America, where some of them are very anti-Trump and some are very pro-Trump. It's not really clear how technology is impacting all of this. And so right now it feels like the rules as we knew them, even though the rules were bad.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think in large degree, some of that, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier with, people in the suburbs, I think the main reason that a lot of those sort of like middle class, upper middle class people are really not liking Trump right now is just because it all feels so chaotic.
Yeah. And I think
it's just chaos.
to some degree, that's all Biden can offer us, is a return to corporate democracy. He can offer us a return to the center. And that was a terrible center to be at. And we all know what the issues were with that center. And we had all been fighting them for years and blah, blah, blah.
We'll continue to do so.
And we'll continue to have to do so. But I think that the sort of low information, but relatively middle class voter that lives in those white suburbs is somebody who is eager to return back to center. And center for us is not center in Russia. It's not autocracy. It's corporate governance.
Yep.
At some point, whatever form of government our government turns into, because it seems to be evolving, that's actually our center. So I don't think we have to worry. We have to worry about a very different series of events than what you would normally worry about in a traditional autocratic governance situation.
Yeah.
Because we are a different kind of government and we're sort of, our larger sort of political culture is very different than what you would find in somewhere like Russia.
Yeah.
But the thing that you have to keep an eye out for, the thing that actually returns us back to the state where things remain as bad as they have always been, is a Joe Biden, obviously. And so I think I'm in some ways comforted, because I think the one thing we will all feel when we get back on track as corporate governance resumes is that we finally understand what the rules are again. Yeah. So we can figure out how to push within those confines. But it is really frustrating to find that no matter how insane a risk that we take with our government, we elected a wannabe dictator, and we still are never going to get away. Like, what we're going to center back to is not going to be what Russia centers back to, which is going to just be an autocracy with like a charismatic figurehead. It's going to be corporate governance again. It's always going to be that, no matter how hard we try to be insane. So in some ways that's comforting, and in other ways that's horrifying.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
In any case, sorry, that was a digression.
No,
I just wanted to remind everyone that I feel like the thing that we're fighting is not what it seems like we're fighting. We're not fighting like Russia-style autocaucracy. We're fighting corporate governance. Keep that in mind as you think about how you want to proceed in your political life.
Right.
Speaking of
I was just going to say, we were talking about the vice presidential pick.
Yes, sorry.
No, that's okay.
That was my noon digression.
That was an enjoyable
coffee-fueled digression.
We're entering the second half of the podcast. So
that's right. Caffeine's kicking in.
Right. Anyway, Karen Bass, one of the potential finalists, is getting some new vetting that she has never had to go through before, because nobody knew who she was 3 weeks ago. And it's led to some stories that I certainly didn't have on my 2020 VP bingo card.
No. I mean, maybe once we realized that California politicians were even in the running, we should have called the Scientology one.
Right, we should have known. Yeah.
Because one of the great vetting things that's come up is a speech that Karen Bass gave at the Church of Scientology.
Yes.
Now, keep in mind, this is like a real constituency in her district. So like, as much as we all hate the Church of Scientology and don't trust them at all, this is something that is a local issue to some extent.
That's what I was going to say.
In a way that it's not in like Tennessee.
Right. I mean, I would say that she certainly should have, there's a few things here that I would say on her behalf here. This certainly going to church openings, which is what this was, because it had just gone through a bunch of renovations, is something that you do as a politician. That is just, you go and you give a speech. And you give the type of speech where like you probably spend 5 minutes researching, and you look at their website and find out that their creed says that they speak to all people everywhere and whatever race, color, or creed. And you're like, all right, well, that's something I can get on board with. And you don't think about it again. And again, I'm not making excuses for these things, but like, I'm just telling you what happened. Like, this is the sequence of events that happened. And also it was in 2010, which I realized was not that long ago, but we had also not had the Leah Remini documentary. We had not had Going Clear. We had not had all of these. That's not to say that people weren't questioning of Scientology in 2010, because people were. I mean, ever since I've lived here, it has been a known thing that like Scientologists are going in the crazy.
Abuse allegations were not there. It was all tax fraud allegations at that time. Right. They were committing all sorts of, and are committing all sorts of tax
But churches everywhere are doing that. So like this church was no different for her.
This is just a weird cult in her district that has thousands of members that she was like, all right, well.
Yeah, there were 6,000 people at the speech. It was probably her highest attended speech that she's ever given, if we're being honest honest with ourselves.
This is a big money business in her district. If you're trying to get those Scientology donations, you show up at their church fund. Think about how their real estate holdings in her district.
Yeah.
They own every fancy building in the district.
Yeah.
In any case, not an excuse because Scientology is banana pants. But but that is certainly, I think there is some context to that maybe outside of LA is not as clear, where you're like, well, this is a big thing here. Like you don't want it to be, but here we are.
Of course, she sought to clarify that she is not a Scientologist herself, that she's actually a Baptist, which I feel like is information that I could have continued not knowing.
Could have had her just say that she's not a Scientologist and I would have believed her, because I believe almost anyone when they tell you they're not a Scientologist, and then I move on with my life.
Yeah.
The people.
I think that this is less problematic for her than the next story that we're going to talk about, which, while ridiculous,
don't think this is as problematic as I think the traditional right would want us to think.
Well, and I think that like this is a thing. I mean, like because we're going to talk about her like quote unquote issues with some of the things that she's said about Cuba in the past. But like, are Cubans voting for Democrats in Florida anyway?
Not the ones who care about this.
Right. That's what I thought.
I mean,
they're electing Marco Rubio year on year.
Correct.
Right. That's yes.
The Cubans that care deeply about never issuing a kind word towards Fidel Castro are also Cubans who don't vote for Democrats ever under any circumstances.
Correct.
Their kids might vote for Democrats, but also I would contend that their kids, being people that are for the most part American born and fully Americanized and all American people, are Americans. And so they are less concerned, like they have the concerns that a person in America might have about how people are treated in America, and are less likely to care about a time that you issued a kind word towards Fidel Castro.
Right.
Like, I just don't, I feel like this is a thing that people, because everyone who's running for president is like 100 years old and is of the Cold War era, is going to seem like a big deal to the political class that's running stuff.
Yeah.
But is not a big deal to voters, because I just think Fidel Castro is dead.
Right. I know.
It's like, we're over it. Too bad.
Right. The only issue, I don't see this as an issue in November. I see this as a potential issue
for her
getting the job, because Biden is going to, be like, oh, we'll never win Florida,
right.
and then that'll be the end of her, and we'll never hear from her again.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I feel like she is somebody who, the problem is that there's not room for nuanced discussion about this anywhere, because she is somebody who has repeatedly visited Cuba.
Right. She started going in the 1970s when she was like 20, to build homes there.
Probably if you asked her, she could speak, as most people who've gone and done that kind of thing, which is something I've done myself, you can speak articulately about the drawbacks of the Castro regime,
right,
without sort of, but also if you're a progressive and you see a very poor nation undertake, massive universal public interest projects like educating everyone in healthcare and whatever, you are able to articulate that there is a world in which that's an admirable thing to have done,
right,
without saying that everyone should have, a dictator. I think the problem is just going to be that Marco Rubio and potentially Ted Cruz are going to get up in everyone's business about
Marco Rubio said she will be the highest ranking Castro sympathizer in the history of the United States government.
I mean, calling her a Castro sympathizer is I know, weird anachronism too. He's dead. Too late.
Right.
The whole thing fell apart. It's over now. It doesn't make, it's not, but also I think people were generally in favor of opening up relations with Cuba under Obama.
Well, yeah.
And I think that they did not like that Trump tried to pull that back. I think people have been interested in Cuba for a long time. And so I don't think that this is the time in history where this issue matters that much.
I agree.
It's all they have with her, aside from giving a speech to Scientology.
Right.
But I just don't, I mean, God, can you imagine how many things could be pulled up if I was running for office about me saying kind things about Cuba? I also, though, don't think, I have tracked over the years how people react to those things. And it has changed really dramatically in the last 15 years.
I bet.
I think I went to Cuba for the first time 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And at that time, people were like, I can't believe your parents even let you do that. And then 5 years ago, suddenly everyone was like, can you tell me where to go in Havana? So I like,
yeah, exactly.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
In any case, I think a bigger concern is going to be that the economy is falling apart. We have no COVID package. The unemployment benefits expired and no one has done anything about it.
Yep.
The Senate bill or the White House bill, one of them was supposed to have the eviction moratorium extension and didn't.
Yeah, we told you last week that it had it in it because they hadn't fully released their own bill at that point, but like they had released bullet points, and Steve Mnuchin had been on the Sunday shows last week when we recorded talking about how the eviction moratorium was going to be in there, and that didn't even get in there. Yeah. So
and so now they're trying to say that they'll do a short-term continuation of the $600 a week benefits. Here's how I have two things to say about this. Here's how I know that they know this needs to continue, is that they would not be offering this if this did not serve their needs in some way. They need it to continue. They need it to look like it was the Democrats that wanted to spend the money, but they need their constituents to keep getting those $600 checks.
Yes.
So they have to have that $600 come back.
Right. Yeah,
now, the Democrats can't figure out what their line is on this, so they're doing a terrible job of negotiating on our behalf.
Right. Like Steny Hoyer is like, it's not $600 or bust.
Which, first of all, fuck off. It is absolutely $600
right. Well, and even if it's not, your public stance has to be that it is. And even your private stance has to be that it is. And then when you get to $400, which would be terrible, because it would still be cutting $800 out of what people are getting right now and would not be covering 100% of wages for a lot of people, then at least you did that and you didn't get stuck with 200. But like once you don't even know like what your red line is, which should be fairly simple to decide.
So true.
Then you've backed yourself into a corner where like you have no place to bargain from, which is the thing that the Democrats do like literally all the time.
When you know the Republicans need it too.
Right.
They need you to want this.
Right.
This is one area where you can serve your constituents and you have a shared need.
Right, exactly. Like they will pass it eventually and then they'll crow about the debt, which is fine. They always do that whenever they pass anything that, they accept, it's like, even when they pass their own shit, like tax cuts, it's like, oh God, now the national debt is so good. Well, it's like, you just gave $2 trillion away in tax cuts.
Right.
So like, but they're going to do what they're going to do, but you still have to get them to pass the $600, which you're right. I think that they, on some level, deep in their hearts know that they can't be cutting thousands of dollars out of people's take-home pay right now, which is basically coming from unemployment insurance because tens of millions of people are unemployed right now.
Yeah, no, it's
so like stick to your guns on this one for God's sake.
Well, and Schumer said it was non-negotiable. So part of the issue is that the House and the Senate don't even know what
they can't even agree with themselves.
They haven't gotten together to talk about it apparently.
Right, even though they've all been in the same room with each other while they've been bargaining over this.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the GDP fell 9.5% in the last quarter, which is a fall that actually has no comparison in the modern era. Like the decline is twice as big as the 2008 recession.
Yep.
And we weren't keeping track in the same way the last time that we had a major crash like this. They think that maybe a parallel would be the Great Depression or the demobilization after World War II, but the modern economic statistics did not start until after that. So we don't actually know. So in terms of modern recorded economic statistics, this is the largest and quickest downturn that has ever occurred. Our miraculous rebound is stalled. We're back to millions filing for unemployment. There are not people rehiring at a rate that makes up for the job losses. And a lot of the job losses that we're seeing now are permanent job losses. They're not furloughs and layoffs that could be reversed.
And the only thing that might turn the economy around right now, besides jobs, obviously, is injecting money into it.
$600 a week in everyone's hands.
And every single economist, conservative ones as well, would tell you that that is the case. There is not, good luck finding an economist on this earth that would tell you it is a good idea to remove $1,600, which would be what the cut from 600 to 200 would be from people's pockets right now. Find somebody who would tell me that would be a good idea. You cannot. The
reason the GDP is falling is because people don't have any purchasing power.
Exactly.
That's what drives the GDP. We have said many times is a fake stat that doesn't have anything to do with quality of life or people's well-being. It's just like a thing we made up so that we could track how rich people are continuing to get richer.
Right.
But the thing that makes the economy function is also the thing that makes the GDP rise, which is people
buying shit and then people making more things because the demand is there for people to buy things.
Tracks what people are buying and making. Yeah. And if you have a huge sudden cut to that, and by the way, this is not over the course of months as it was in 2008. This is over the course of years as it was in 2008. This is 1 quarter. This is 1 quarter. So this is also the swiftest fall that we've ever had. And a lot of these losses are permanent.
Right.
They're not being reversed.
Right.
The only way to reverse that, or to at least keep yourself afloat, is to just give people money so that they can go and keep the economy at least sputtering on.
Right. Yeah. And you're going to have to do it because we don't have COVID any more under control than we did weeks, months, 6 months ago. And we have it less under control. Right. Exactly. So
we had 1.9 million new infections in July.
And that's 42% of our entire number of infections, which is 4.5 million cases. So that is not great. Like we had almost half just in July.
And also the virus is picking back up in places that thought they had it under control.
Yes.
And places
like the Midwest is seeing another surge again.
Right. California has been, we know that. But even New Jersey is starting to see another surge. So
Rhode Island, Massachusetts are always, it's still mostly under control there, but it's spread enough that like you're starting to see community spread. And like that is obviously what they're trying to avoid there because they've seen this movie once and it was ugly.
Right. And this is like pretty consistent. We're like much worse off than the rest of the world, like much worse off, but they are also seeing some minor increases as well.
Yeah.
In the rest of the world, like Japan, which was, they didn't shut down to the extent that the rest of the world shut down, but they were pretty consistent mask wearers before this.
Oh, did you see that Dr. Burke said that we might be needing to wear face shields?
Oh no.
I ordered face shields on Amazon the other day.
I'm going to have to order a face shield.
You can have it.
Oh, good. I just feel like stressed by, it was so hard to order masks on Amazon. Like I couldn't.
Oh my God, I know. It's like now we're getting it in our eyeballs.
Yeah. I don't have the energy for that.
No, I don't have the energy for that either.
But
Japan, Australia is like shutting down in Melbourne. Right. Yeah. They should anybody should be able to get this quickly taken care of. But also even Hong Kong, Israel, Spain, which we remember was one of the early European countries that was really bad, are sort of in the midst of fighting second waves right now. And Germany is having an insane situation right now because they have it under control, but they've done it by really probably having the most strict, testing and contact tracing and restrictions. They have really put shit on lockdown.
They have not had the most strict life restrictions. They have just been really proactive about testing and contact tracing.
Testing and contact tracing. Like literally everybody has apps on their phone.
They never had a situation where every business had to close in Germany.
Right. Yeah. But they had this insane protest that had like 17,000 people at it. And granted, some of it was, supported by neo-Nazi groups and conspiracy theorists and various other things. But like, they're having a lot of unrest there. And one thing that is not great for anyone is German unrest.
I was going to say, any place you don't want to find unrest, there are people that have shown us that massive civic unrest can lead you down a rabbit hole that you don't necessarily want to go down.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they're having anti-masker protests like we are.
Yeah.
There's something a little similar about American and German political culture, actually, that I feel, or not even political culture, but sort of like activist culture, that I have always found kind of striking, because I feel like in the same way that they are kind of, they love the sort of style of unbridled corporate corporate rule, the most of any European nation. They have more social protections than we do, but it's really their government that has pushed they've pushed austerity measures onto other nations. They have themselves sort of sold themselves out to large corporations in a way that the American government often does. Like they sort of have a similar sense of that. But they also, because of that, have a similar sort of strain of like dangerous extremism. And obviously the real difference is that we live in a country that is vast and diverse. And so that strain here cannot sort of like easily sort of absorb the rest of the culture. Like Donald Trump has been the president for 4 years, and if he had his way, we would all be white supremacist assholes, but he just can't get control of us that way.
Right, exactly.
But Germany's little, and it is a country where the conservative, the conservative end of the government really believes that that there is something, that there is a kind of like German ethnic identity.
Well, right.
Like there is not in America, as you can try to pretend that your ethnic identity is the right one, but like we all know that's kind of bullshit. And if you were to travel 20 miles north of you, they might think a different thing. In Germany, there's like a little bit more of a sort of unified sense of what it is to be German, and who is not German and who is German, and who is Turkish but living in Germany, and who, whatever. And so I feel like they have like our style problems, but like in a condensed extreme way that really makes it combustible over there.
Yeah, it's scary. Well, yeah.
I have a lot of theories today, apparently.
I know. Oh, by the way, sort of related, actually. I don't need to explain the whole thing to you, but I just listened to, and I would highly recommend it. There's a Radio Lab that sort of like looks at some of the fallout, both politically, but also like in the art world or whatever, that like took place after the 1918 flu outbreak.
Yes.
There's a whole story about like how Woodrow Wilson getting the flu when he was in Paris trying to negotiate like how they were going to punish Germany after the First World War, like with Clemenceau, who was the president of France at the time, who really wanted to like put strict measures on them, about how when he got the flu, kind of lost his mind and like let Clemenceau have everything that he wanted, which sort of like ultimately a lot of people point to the punishments that were put on Germany after that, like, are what sort of like led to like the Nazi uprising, like that ultimately led to World War II. So they were basically sort of like, there are some historians who are like, it was the second wave of the flu that was going on in Paris that like led to the Nazis.
Right, that caused the Nazis.
So like when you're thinking about what COVID-19 is going to do, and you're reading a story about 17,000 people who might be neo-Nazis,
convening to protest the German government.
Right. Like that is something that like you want to file away in the back of your mind.
Right. Just keep your eye on the situation.
Right. Watch that.
Another thing that's happening now that we're under the pressure to reopen the schools is that we are slowly learning that children can transmit coronavirus to everyone and anyone by finally paying attention to what they're up to.
And fast.
And fast.
And in more and
yeah, there was a summer camp in Georgia that, that had like a sort of lakeside retreat thing. And one counselor tested negative on entry, but ended up coming down with coronavirus at the camp. And like hundreds of people got it within just a few days. I mean, it like happened very fast.
Yeah. At one point like this, and the CDC like did a study on it, and they had information about 344 campers. There's a couple hundred more that they don't have any info on, but like 260 campers and staff had been infected.
Yeah.
So like
344 tests. So that's wild.
Very wild. Yes.
That's.
Oy. It'll be, I think what's important to look at there, I mean, look, you don't want kids getting this anyway, because also there's counselors there, there's adults there. And this is the same thing that we, and you specifically, have been saying about schools, is that, there's older people who are at the schools, and then also obviously parents at home. It's going to be interesting to see if we get any numbers about infections that were passed on sort of like through community spread, like from these children, like once they went home. Because I think there's still a lot of at least supposed questions anyway about whether they, how badly they get it and how badly they sort of like give it to elders, and like also end up dying at that point.
There was an article this week in the Times about how young children have much higher viral loads than everyone else. So even though they're not getting sick, no one is sure if they're spreading it.
Well, this is a thing that we've known about kids forever. They're germ cesspools. Like this is how everybody, this is how adults for, hundreds of years have been getting sick. The reason that we adults get colds is because like some awful children gave it to somebody initially, and then they brought
it to work and they passed it to us.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you got the cold or the flu last year or at any year in your life, like it originated from a disgusting child.
Children
sorry.
Yeah, there's a child in the link that brought you the flu, no matter what 100%. Happens.
Yes.
Also, speaking of schools, some of the first ones to open have already closed. So.
Right. The first one in Indiana that opened this week did not make it through the day, literally. Yeah. And I want to talk about this because like this is something that I think you have at least talked a little bit about, just sort of like what that, you know, people are talking about wanting to get kids back to normalcy. And you sort of like talking about like, okay, if everybody's in masks and has to be 6 feet away from each other and like stand across the room and like blah, 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 like that's not normal. Another thing that is not normal is for the child who got that to then be quarantined and then contact traced amongst all of their friends at school who spent any time with them, who are now probably scared. That kid is probably like permanently an outcast. I mean, like literally, like it's just like the reaction, the response to this, while correct, like this is what you have to do. You have to quarantine these kids. But like imagine being, you know, an elementary aged kid and like going through that. It would be something that would like literally haunt you for life, whether also, you were that kid or whether you were one of the kids who had come in contact with him. It would change.
Actually quarantine a child.
Well, right.
Like that's the other thing is like, even if a child is technically quarantined, a parent has to care for them.
Right.
So it's not like if I contracted coronavirus, I could quarantine inside my apartment and I could take care of myself.
Right.
And no one would have to catch coronavirus from me.
Right.
Well, you can't quarantine an 8-year-old.
Right.
8-year-olds cannot take care of all of their needs. So, you know, what you're then imposing is risk onto the family, because then the parents are going to catch it from the kid. Yep. And then, you know, we're back to wondering whether adults are going to die because kids had to go back to school.
Yep.
But yeah, I think also we're seeing the limitations of screening people on the way in.
Yeah. It's like just making sure that somebody doesn't have a fever on their way into a place is not doing anything for anybody.
No. And also you test negative for coronavirus until you don't.
Well, right.
And that doesn't mean you're not about to get it. You know, in the same way as a cold, you don't have a cold the moment you come in contact with a cold.
Right.
You have it a week later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's going to be the same thing that happens here.
Yeah. If
you're wondering why we're in this situation, though.
Right.
We can tell you.
We sure can.
It's because
we left Jared Kushner in charge.
Yeah. We put Jared Kushner in charge of every crisis that we don't intend to solve, like the Middle East peace crisis.
And they were working on a national plan and then decided, you know, it seems like it's only happening in New York, which is run by Democrats. So like, let's just let the Democrats all die.
Right. And then we'll blame the governor.
And then we'll blame the governors. Right. Yeah.
This kind of thing has been so rampant in so many communities for coronavirus, where like at first it was in New York, and even here I heard people saying, but it's probably not going to spread here because, you know, we don't live on top of each other like New York. You heard people saying, oh, like at the very beginning of the crisis, I kept seeing friends of mine on Facebook post who were doctors. You know, I have a lot of friends who are doctors on Facebook because I went to a math and science high school. So I kept seeing friends, specifically friends of color, posting, you guys, you can get this too. Stop acting like Black people don't get coronavirus. And I was like, what is going on? Yeah. And then suddenly the opposite started happening, where, you know, we started to see the death stats for African-American coronavirus patients, and it was horrifying.
Well, in California, Latinos are getting it way more exponentially than even Black people.
So you started seeing like a wave of it, where I started seeing then other doctors be like, you guys, white people can get coronavirus. Like I've been seeing like a lot of discussion as if only other people are getting coronavirus until it's you, and then other people have to step in to be like, remember when we were getting coronavirus? So like, so I feel like the idea that an infectious disease could only affect Democrats is so laughably, it's laughable, and on a policy level unacceptable and ridiculous. And also, you don't sentence people to death just because they're Democrats. So like, sorry about that. But it was also, it's like what idiot laymen have been up to this whole time.
Yeah.
Like a doctor knows that anybody can get coronavirus. Yeah. But Jared Kushner apparently thinks that they can use it to their political advantage because he can't foresee that an infectious disease could continue infecting people.
Right.
The idea that this is like a thought process that went on in their heads at all, in a way that was open enough that someone was able to comment on it. Like a lot of the time this sort of stuff happens and it's couched in language about how they need, rural communities need funding, but cities have, you know, whatever it is. Yeah. It's couched in a rural urban conversation. It's couched in something like that.
Right.
This is like so on the nose that the fact that someone who was working with them was even able to articulate this, like as a thing that was considered by them, is so cynical and inappropriate and wildly ridiculous, and is even more wildly ridiculous when you find out that Herman Cain just died of coronavirus.
Oh my God, and fast too.
Got it 11 days after being at Trump's rally in Tulsa.
Right, and then he died like 2 weeks later. I mean, this went fast. Now, in Donald Trump's defense here, Herman Cain is a 74-year-old cancer survivor who was traveling all over creation without a mask. So while he may very well have got it at Donald Trump's rally, he literally could have got it at any place in America at any time in America over the since March.
The
man was asking to have coronavirus.
Yeah.
And
Trump tweeted a lovely tweet, so much lovelier than anything he's tweeted about anyone who was a positive influence on American politics.
Right, including John Lewis.
My friend Herman Cain, a powerful voice of freedom and all that is good, passed away this morning. I hope you know that I'm shouting the ones that he weirdly capitalized. Herman had an incredible career and was adored by everyone that ever met him, especially me. He was a very special man, an American patriot, a great friend.
Right.
Now I think one thing that they were kindred spirits in a way, because they were both serial abusers. So I do understand.
Yes.
Like, listen.
And both candidates for president who should have never been president.
Correct. Both businessmen who were unqualified to be the president, who came up with campaigned on cockamamie nonsense.
Right. The 999
plan. You might recall it from being an upside down 666 plan.
Right.
And then also him ultimately being taken down by all the women who alleged
sexual harassment, including a potential 13-year-old extramarital affair with a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
So he also believed Trump was considering him for the Federal Reserve, and I remembered in reading about him that he is also a firm believer in the gold standard, which is the monetary system in which our economic unit of account is based on a fixed quantity of gold. Right. So that guy almost ran the Fed.
Yeah, well, Trump wasn't looking for anyone qualified to do that job, and Herman Cain was that man.
Yeah.
And while you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, I also feel that maybe Herman Cain's ignorance has caused other people to be the dead.
Right.
Given that he was tweeting about posting about, I don't know, maybe he was on Facebook, he's old, who can know, but about how proud he was to not be wearing a mask at the Tulsa rally.
Right.
Also, now confirmed coronavirus cases, Raul Grijalva from New Mexico came down with it, and we have a suspicion about where he got it. One Louis Gohmert, who has been walking around the halls of Congress with no mask proudly.
Right. And not only that, and admonishing his staff for following the rules. Basically, it won't let anybody, it's like a mask-free environment. If anybody, even so much as washes their hands, he gets mad at them, basically.
Well, and also he's been having his full staff come in. Most offices have been having only a skeleton crew come in to limit the chance that staff have to interact with each other and catch coronavirus from everyone.
Yeah.
He's been having his whole staff come in. He's been refusing to let them wear masks. He's been refusing to wear masks. And then he attended a hearing on Tuesday with Grijalva, which is probably where he got coronavirus. But he was also at that bar hearing with the Judiciary Committee. He told his staff in person that he had tested positive.
Yep. Called a big meeting.
What a trash person.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi is now requiring masks in the House chambers because apparently you can't trust people in Congress to follow simple guidance. And that hearing that Louis Gohmert may have given coronavirus to everyone at was probably a cesspool of coronavirus because everyone was shouting at it.
Everybody was shouting at each other.
It was insane. First of all, I turned it on just long enough to watch Jerry Nadler scream over Jim Jordan, "The gentleman's rudeness is not recognized." And that kind of sums up how it went. And I was like, I'm out. I can't watch the rest of this.
There were no niceties here. The Democrats were out for blood. They did not really so much care about hearing from Barr, which,
it's fine because he was lying the whole time.
Which is fine because he was lying, yeah. But I mean, they cut off his responses. They accused him of being wrong or lying. And he wasn't allowed extra time at the end of their 5 minutes to actually, a lot of it was just sort of 5 minute speeches from Democrats, just berating him about something. So the Republicans then had to sort of were forced to use their time to actually let him say anything.
Most of what he said were lies. So.
Oh yeah.
I mean, at least.
But he got raked over the coals on this was sort of like wide ranging too. We're going to talk about another hearing coming up.
Everything.
Right. There was another hearing this week that was interesting that we're going to talk about in a second with all the like leaders of like the tech, companies that was sort of like fairly pointed about what they were all there for. This was like, they called him in to just like berate him about like anything that they could think of.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They just called Barr in to sort of read him the riot act on whatever was on their minds at the moment.
Right. Exactly. Like Sheila Jackson Lee and Cedric Richmond like really went after him for trying to get him to admit that there was institutional racism in policing.
Can you imagine being someone who's on the stand at a hearing and is just like, nope, policing is fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Well, Cedric Richmond was like, basically told him that, he admonished Barr because he referenced John Lewis in his opening statement. And then he got on his case for not having any Black people on his senior staff. And then he said, that, sir, is systemic racism.
Yeah. Sheila Jackson Lee just was trying to get Barr to admit that there is racism in policing, and he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, he wouldn't do it. Yeah. So the Republicans' strategy was like in the upside down world because they were just.
Jim Jordan is on this committee, so it was a lot of theater. Jim Jordan's strategy.
He cannot be stopped.
Talk over everyone at a hearing. He's just like an impossible person, and he does a thing that bullies do, where he just keeps making noise until you have to let him steamroll you because you just can't handle having any more noise in your ear.
Yeah, but he was trying to get. He was basically just highlighting that there have been all the violence is against the police.
Yes.
Like that's what's going on.
Famous problem.
Yes. He did his opening statement, and then he had like this lengthy video that spliced together like people talking about how they were peaceful protesters, then with scenes of violence and rioting that have occurred like at some of these protests. So that was wild, that everybody had to sit through that. And then he also was like,
this is the best part of this whole hearing.
Yeah, he asked Barr if St. John's Church outside the White House would still be standing if not for the police response to the protesters there. And at another point, he asked the same question basically about the courthouse in Portland that they've been sent there to quote unquote protect.
Would it still be standing? If you had not...
Right, the protesters were going to tear down the church.
Protesters in an illegal act, in an illegal attempt with unidentified federal officers firing rubber bullets on them. If you had not committed war crimes, would that church still be standing?
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's Barr, by the way, came off as the partisan asshole that we know him to be.
Right. He said that he wasn't, but then everything that he said was exactly
partisan in a very specific way.
Right. I mean, they asked him whether he thought Ron DeSantis was doing a good job in Florida in regards to COVID, and his response was, "Did Cuomo do an incredible job?" Which I would contend New York is the only state that is functioning properly right now after Cuomo probably did do an incredible job.
Would contend that I am a person who would even contend Cuomo did not do an incredible job, but that doesn't invalidate the question of whether DeSantis did.
Well, right, exactly. But the fact that he like went after a Democratic governor,
right, instead of just admitting
no
that
reason, right? I mean, there was no reason for him to do that.
Well, it's an irrelevant answer.
Right. He's also setting the stage for election fraud. So he's going to carry Trump's water on that front because like he got asked about it. He got asked to provide evidence that mail-in voting is at risk because foreign countries are going to produce counterfeit ballots and
surprise,
blah, blah, blah.
He didn't have any evidence.
Right. He said, no, I don't have any evidence, but I have common sense. So it's common sense that like foreign governments would just print ballots and then send them over here.
Famous thing that foreign governments do.
Yes. So, but easily the best moment was from American hero Pramila Jayapal, who has been a hero of ours for a while. Yeah. But she had another great moment in the tech hearing, which we'll tell you about in a second. Yeah. But she basically just went like on a 4-minute rant, which you can watch online, and I would highly recommend that you do so. But she basically like called out his hypocrisy on sending, federal troops into places where they are having Black Lives Matter protests, but not sending them into places where like, unmasked, AK-47 toting people are like going in and like threatening to like shoot the governor of Michigan, dead on arrival. Right. So that was a special moment. You probably saw it on social media, but if you haven't like actually watched it, I would recommend it because it was probably like the closest thing to a mic drop moment that hearing had.
She's the greatest.
She's the best.
And that's sometimes when you're the best, you have to carry everyone's weight. at a hearing that had no purpose or
right. Another progressive who is here to meet the moment that we're in.
Exactly. Yeah, it's only progressives that are meeting the moment. I wouldn't even say that. I think there are some moderates that are actually meeting the moment. They're just all freshmen, and so you don't hear about them.
Right.
I think the issue is more that the incumbents aren't meeting the moment.
Right.
Like, these are all progressives who are fairly new. Jayapal is maybe the oldest of that class of progressives. She's like the mother of that class. So she's been there for 2 terms, exactly. But it's like the problem is just everyone has too much experience. So they're not meeting the moment because they're not meeting any moment because their moment passed terms and terms ago.
Yeah.
We also had a big tech hearing where they couldn't get Jeff Bezos's internet to work right.
Right.
So
his feed, they had to stop down for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Google's Sundar Pichai, and Tim Cook from Apple. They were all there, which was wild that they were all there. I mean, they weren't all there. They were there virtually, which was also weird. They were all there like on Cisco WebEx. So they were like, there was like a giant screen in the room for everybody to watch, which we'll tell you about caused some weirdness, some other weirdness. But, you know, they were all there like this was interesting because this was something where, you know, like we mentioned, the Barr one was sort of just about like an evisceration of sort of like any topic that they could think of that like Barr had been on the wrong side of. The Democrats sort of really had an actual plan that was clear from the get-go that they had obviously planned beforehand. And it was sort of about, and you see them setting the stage basically to attempt to break these guys up, or at least like more heavily regulate them, because what they were all getting at was that they are too big and they are basically like, they've created monopolies for themselves by sort of like taking over, you know, and shutting down all competition, basically.
And I want to point out an interesting dynamic in this hearing and in life in general is that Amazon's headquarters is actually in Pramila Jayapal's district.
Yes. Well, that's in large part how she got elected.
Yeah, because it was her opposition to them.
Right. Yes. She was running against Amazon. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating dynamic that played out because she was really on the attack against Amazon. And Jeff Bezos would not say that Amazon isn't using the data that they get from other sellers on their site to basically enrich their own, you know, white label.
I think that was probably, when you look at this, you know, this was not as loud and as insane as that Barr hearing. I watched a little bit of it and I was like, this is less interesting, just because it was less theater. It was like getting into some of the minutia of like some of what these tech companies are doing, which is sometimes hard to follow. It's certainly hard to follow if you're an old Republican because they didn't know what was going on half the time. We'll get to that in a second.
They asked some very hilarious questions.
But I think as far as sort of like big takeaways, probably the biggest, closest thing to a bombshell was probably this one, because there was a report earlier this year from the Wall Street Journal that said that Amazon was scooping up all of their user data, and also data from their independent sellers, and then using that data to create their own competing products, and then also put those higher when you're searching also. So basically like shutting down competition by basically like using the information that they've gathered from it, and then also like not allowing people to like even find it when they're searching.
Speaking of common sense, this is something that as a user of Amazon's site, you can figure out.
You can assume that they're doing, but they have categorically denied it up until literally this hearing when Jeff Bezos was asked about it. And he said, I can't answer that yes or no.
Yeah.
So that was a big one. And I think may have some long-term effects for what Congress is going to do about Amazon, because they're not going to, at least Democrats anyway, are not going to stand for that, I don't think.
Well, and there were sort of similar concerns about monopoly-ish concerns about Facebook buying Instagram and why they bought Instagram. I mean, you know, a lot of the mergers that you've seen that you've been like, it'd be better if these weren't merged.
Well, and Google has been accused of, you know, stealing like content from Yelp, basically, like pretty much like stealing their reviews for like Google searches. So like you basically like don't have to go to Yelp to get that content. And so they were asked about that. So you see sort of like how, and Apple, he was sort of like got a little bit less attention than the other three, which kind of makes sense, I guess, when you think about like what
Apple's
it is
sort
that
of
they're
in
trying
their
to get to
own
here.
lane. It's just that their app store has been accused of being a monopoly.
Right, and so that's what Lucy McBath was asked some pretty pointed questions about, like their decision. Like they specifically removed some parental control apps, like after they introduced their own. And started putting those on the phone. So like it became clear that they were like trying to like shut down competition like within the App Store because they had their own. Right.
Because they have a monopoly on everything that you do on your phone, because they have long limited the kinds of apps that you know are available to people.
Yeah.
Which is why jailbreaking your phone was such a big thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Remember jailbreaking phones?
Yeah, sure do.
Yeah. The Republicans had a different agenda. But I would argue that it's interesting that they also had an agenda, because nobody in this hearing was happy with big tech. It was not a situation in the Barr hearing where Jim Jordan was like there to tell Bill Barr what a great job.
Right, and the Republicans would like let Barr respond to the Democrats because it was in their interest to like let him do so.
In this hearing, they were mad for different reasons, but the Republicans were also mad. And the reason that they were mad, and Jim Jordan was also in this hearing, you guys, so he was up to his usual tricks, is because they were furious that they think these platforms have an anti-conservative bias.
Yes.
So the fact that they are monopoly should also concern the GOP.
Yeah.
Because they shouldn't want platforms with an anti-conservative bias to be the only platforms. So Jim Jordan actually like got out there and tried to make half of an argument instead of just talking, which was interesting.
Yeah.
But less theatrical.
I know. And couldn't be farther from the truth also. I mean, there's literally there's no evidence of this at all.
No.
You know, I mean, he read a bunch of headlines about it.
To be mad.
Like, well, I know, right? And I would contend, after having just listened to Rabbit Hole, which I would recommend to everyone, at that New York Times podcast about like basically like how people get to conspiracy theories online, is that these companies are most certainly not doing what he's requesting, because the fact that any single human has been able to find QAnon disproves
exactly
what it is that he's trying to tell you right now, because you know, it's those types of things on YouTube and various social media.
Conservative conspiracy theories.
No, they're not. They're highlighting it potentially, but certainly not censoring it. So there was some weirdness with the format, because they literally had like this huge screen in the chamber, and like also some of the Congress people like weren't coming from WebEx as well. Some of them were there in person. So it just had like some weird technical things. And also it was brought up in some article that like, while it was interesting to sort of like see how it all played out, there were also some downsides to it, besides the fact that they had to, you know, spend time getting everybody's feed to work. But like, you know, you couldn't see people's reactions like on the panel actually. Yeah. So there were like some interesting kind of like barbs between them, like at least most specifically, like Jeff Bezos described social media at one point as a nuanced destruction machine, but we couldn't see Mark Zuckerberg when he said it, because it was Jeff Bezos' giant face who was speaking. So he was the one who was like taking up the entire screen, like, cause he was talking. So it's like, then it went to him. So it would have been great to know what Mark Zuckerberg was thinking to himself as he was being shit talked by the world's richest man. Like,
rich person infighting. Yeah. There was a little theater, because Jim Jordan is never one to let a moment pass without a little theater. So he got into some shouting matches, just with other members of the committee, having nothing to do with anything. But also the Republicans, Sensenbrenner specifically, who's the ranking member, had a hilarious exchange with Mark Zuckerberg where he asked him, he said, it was reported that Donald Trump Jr. got taken down for a period of time because he put something up on the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. I wouldn't take it myself, but there's still a debate on whether it's effective either at treating or preventing COVID-19. Why did this removal happen? And Zuckerberg was like, that was on Twitter.
Right. He said, it's hard for me to speak to that because that was on Twitter. Man.
You know,
Jim Jordan got yelled at to put his mask on too, because in one of his rants, he was like masked or unmasked and was
he's out there with everyone giving coronavirus to the entire Congress. I bet he's had a conversation with Louis Gohmert.
Oh, I'm sure he has.
There's no way that the two of them have not exchanged words and germs.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
but speaking of hydroxychloroquine,
speaking of
the reason that Sensenbrenner came up at all was because he was talking about a retweet of Donald Trump, who was tweeting, or Donald Trump Jr., who was retweeting his own father in regards to this video that you've probably seen about this summit of doctors. I'm using air quotes here if you're not watching on YouTube. And it featured a video from this article that we pulled the quotes from, calls her eccentric, and that's certainly a word that you could use. Right. But her name is Dr. Stella Emanuel, who claimed that the hydroxychloroquine is a cure. She's treated hundreds of people with it.
Hundreds.
And that masks aren't necessary at all because we have a cure, so everybody can just take hydroxychloroquine.
Perfect.
That eventually got taken down on all platforms, and as Sensenbrenner noted, Trump's account was locked by Twitter.
Trump Jr.'s account.
Trump Jr., was locked by Twitter. And guys,
Dr. Stella Emanuel is quite a character.
She is definitely eccentric. Yes.
Because she has also, her other famous commentary has been in the world of demon sex.
Demon sex, yes. It causes a lot of gynecological ailments, apparently. Right. Is having sex in a dream world with demons, and then their semen causes whatever affliction is that they're having. It's not an
STD. It's not a yeast infection. It is dream world demon semen.
Dream demon semen. Yeah. Also claims that doctors are using alien DNA in medical treatments. And that lizard-like reptilian alien. I love it. This is a theory that has been around forever, and I just love it so much because it's like it never goes away, and I can't make sense of how it got started and why people would actually believe it, because there's not reptilian people. It's not a thing.
I've never seen one.
But somehow they're running the United States government and have been for decades. For decades, were to believe this theory. But she does, certainly.
I mean, I believe that years ago I read an article in Huffington Post that was Dwight D. Eisenhower's niece or grandniece or something, who was a conspiracy theorist of the highest order, who also believed that reptilian aliens were involved in the U.S. government. And my favorite thing about the article, this was from probably the mid 2000s-ish, late 2000s-ish, was that the article said she described herself as Eisenhower's niece, but did not clarify that.
Right. So, similar
That's the
to
kind
how
of people that are peddling this theory.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is. Yeah. Similar to how Dr. Stella Emanuel describes herself as a doctor.
Right, exactly.
I love, though, that she, the one thing that I have to give her is that she does believe this in a way that makes her unable to see that we are even making fun of her. It's so because the Daily Beast released all of this stories and clips of her from various events that she's having and whatever else, and she responded. She said in a statement on Twitter, she said, "The Daily Beast did a great job summarizing our deliverance ministry and exposing incubus and succubus. Thank you, Daily Beast. If you need deliverance from these spirits, contact us." So she was glad that the Daily Beast is finally getting her message out there for her.
Fair coverage from the Daily Beast. They had accurately described her deliverance ministry.
2020, guys.
2020.
Really out here doing it.
The aliens are coming. It is.
Oh, no, they're here.
They're running the U.S. They've been here the whole time. They're older than you.
Right. They're in our medicines.
That's right. They're in our medicines. They're running the government. It's been a wild ride. And it's only going to continue.
That's right.
Because the Republican convention is coming up. Then we're going to find out who Joe Biden finally picks to be his running mate. Get ready to be underwhelmed. I'm preparing myself mentally to have a full mental breakdown about it, even though it's not going to be a surprise. And, then we're straight on to the final stretch.
Off we go.
Yeah, wait, my final message is.
Great.
Because one thing I think that happens at this time of year, every time, is that the Democrats are almost always leading by 1,000,000 points in the polls. And everyone is like, oh, good, we did it. The polls
on this podcast multiple times implied that Joe Biden was going to be the president.
Right. The polls
and
right
while
now
I
mean
believe
nothing.
that to be true, but yes, you're absolutely right.
Anything could happen.
We have to make that happen. We have to.
Well, and also James Comey could come up again. I mean, like, you know, there's a series of events that we couldn't have even possibly imagined or predicted would happen.
Yes.
That could still come up and bite us in the ass. So I would contend that one thing that we can't do at this juncture is get cocky about how terrible Trump is doing.
100%.
Now, I'm not about to get cocky about how well Biden is doing because I think he's awful. But I am here to tell you that his polling is only good right now, and that at any moment it could be bad. And also,
much like coronavirus testing, you're fine until you're not.
Exactly. And one thing about Joe Biden that I think is the major disadvantage of Joe Biden is that, like Donald Trump, he has the ability to speak something so ridiculous and crazy into existence.
Truly.
He could lose everything on the basis of one bad speech.
Yep.
That's a risk that we have undertaken in having someone who can't always string a coherent thought together be our candidate. I think that is why they are eager to figure out how to do this running mate thing right, because they need someone who can string a coherent thought together. Right. There are going to be debates at some point that are between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and they are not going to make any sense, and it's going to be confusing for everyone, and we're going to have to live in a world where polling reflects that. So do not get cocky. Get organized at the local level so that you, even if you don't feel that excited about Joe Biden, you're excited about a Democrat on the ballot and you get people to the polls.
Yeah.
But polling right now is a nonsense art. I mean, we love to follow it, but
I was going to say, and there are, I think, important things to learn from it. It's not
there's trends,
nothing, but exactly. Yeah.
But the trends only last until they change. Trends are only trends until different trends come into effect.
That's why it's called a trend.
That's right.
It doesn't last forever.
So they're temporary. Yeah. So keep that in mind. Do your best and get your send for your mail-in ballot as soon as possible.
Right. Even if you decide you want to vote on the day of.
Right.
Just have it.
Have it so that you have it.
That's right. Yeah.
And we will talk to you next week.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.